For those of you who don't know, my name is Ken Linge. I'm the director of NC3, the National Coalition for Community Capital. One of the leaders in certainly in crowdfunding for Main Street businesses is Mainvest, and we're lucky to have Isabel Strobing here today with us from Mainvest to talk about what they're doing in general and how they're responding to this crisis. So welcome, Isabel. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, and it's really great to learn more. I've had the pleasure of talking with Isabel in the past about things they're doing, and really excited to dig in more. So if you maybe just get us started with letting us know about you a little bit and how you found your way to crowdfunding and to Mainvest.
Actually, the story of how I got to Mainvest is serendipitous. I was kind of just doing the classic want to work in a startup thing and going through AngelList, and saw that this really interesting organization called Mainvest was looking for someone to do similar work to what I've done in the past, specifically to help small businesses and communities connect. But I come from a small business family. My grandfather started his own business, kind of the classic rags to riches, Depression era kid owning his own business. My dad owned his own pharmacy, and my mom actually ended up using Mainvest to start a bakery down in Virginia. So on a personal level, it would just seem like the perfect place for me to be. And so I joined the organization not too long ago, almost a year ago now. And I handle, external communications, investor relations in terms of our, Mainvest investors, all different types of marketing and community outreach and things like that. So it's really great anytime I'm able to talk to groups like this, people who really care about the space and care about community capital in general, connecting communities, and really using the power of people to democratize investment, democratize capital, and in terms of Mainvest, really revitalize Main Street and allow some of these kind of previously ignored entrepreneurs and founders to really have a voice and a stake in their community. So that's a little bit about me and how I got here, and I can talk through a little bit about what Mainvest does generally as well.
Great. Yeah, I mean, it seems like you mentioned your family's entrepreneurial history. It seems like there have been some particular times in American history when there's been a particularly strong entrepreneurial spirit and heavy sort of entrepreneurial activity. I wonder if we could start to see one of those periods in the years ahead here, especially. Obviously, things are being shaken up quite a bit, and with a lot of folks out of work, a lot of folks looking around for new opportunities. I wonder what that'll look like. We could well be into a pretty exciting time for entrepreneurship in a way.
Yeah.
I am curious to hear more about kind of the Mainvest background story, sort of how it became what it is, why it chose the kind of course it chose, and what that course generally looks like.
Sure. We can't talk about Mainvest without talking about our co-founder, Nick. So it really is an interesting story about how Mainvest came to be. So Nick Matthews is our CEO. He actually launched Uber in Boston back in the day. He was really early on at Uber, so got kind of a crash course in how do you launch one of the fastest growing marketplaces in history. And so working in the Boston area, he not only got the chops to be able to run a marketplace, and that's what we're running right now, but specifically when it comes to looking at economic development, that's really where he really dug his teeth in terms of when you think about expanding a company like Uber outside of just the city limits of Boston to places like Worcester and Lynn, places outside of city center, the suburbs that were once these economic hubs but are now more economically depressed, with something like Uber work, where you're connecting people with different places to go, different modes of transportation, but also providing entrepreneurial opportunities to drivers, people looking for extra types of income. There, back in the day, it was it was kind of an experiment. It was, being able to see if the model works in these different types of areas. And so in looking into that, and obviously it worked out well for the company, it really inspired Nick to think a little bit more about economic development and the ways that small businesses and everyday people, have a voice in these communities. He ended up down in DC around the same time that Congress was, debating all of the, kind of the Jobs Act regulatory changes. So once Reg CF came into play, it, kind of seemed like the right time to focus in on how Reg CF can be used for small businesses. After looking at the communities and small towns, the lack of economic development in all of these different places that Nick had worked previously. So noticing that Reg CF was really focusing on early stage kind of tech companies, the sense of democratizing capital for the next Uber, the next Airbnb. What Mainvest did, Nick kind of got a couple other people in tow. Our CFO, actually worked in evaluating securities and things like that. So we have a great founding team. They wanted to look at how to retrofit those regulations that many people were using for, again, like, the next great pharmaceutical company or the next cool thing, and instead focus in on how do we democratize capital for the small business owners that are never going to be able to access VC funding, that already struggle to access traditional forms of capital, through bank loans and, the SBA and things like that. And so far it has worked really well. So we've only been around for about a year and a half, but we've helped, dozens of businesses. We've seen hundreds come through the door, over 2 million invested by thousands of investors that are for, the majority within a 5-mile radius of the business. So we were able to take these regulations that many in the space are using, again, for kind of high growth tech companies, and it's working for, at a hyper local level. We're really seeing communities want to rally behind these local businesses, and it's a solid, more flexible way for these founders to raise capital and launch businesses that end up succeeding for a lot longer, which is great.
So one of the key aspects of Mainvest is the revenue share note. It seems like, and I'm wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about that, about why the revenue share note seemed to make sense and sort of how it's working.
Yeah, so I think that's another big differentiator, both in the space, but as well as differentiating from like the more traditional forms of capital. Most of the time, small businesses have to use more of a traditional term loan, which means that whether they're open or not, whether they're doing well or not, they've got to make those monthly payments back to the bank. And even to get that loan in the first place, they probably had to, collateralize their family home or, take crazy terms or something like that. Not in every case. And we have great partners in, the banking space who are able to, be really good partners to these small businesses. But overall, what a revenue sharing note provides is flexibility so that, as well as aligning incentives, between the investor and the business. So, on its face, what it's going to do is incentivize the people investing in the business, again, whether they invested, something like $100 or if they've invested $50,000 in a business, the faster that business generates revenue, it's a very easy and straightforward way for an investor to say, okay, I am incentivized to support this business, tell my friends to have their birthday there, make an introduction to someone who can help them grow their business, because the faster that business grows, the faster I'm going to get my return. So it's a pretty straightforward way to say, oh, it's not just that I like this business, that I want local businesses to succeed. You're both emotionally and financially tied to the success of that business. So it's a really great way to foster those relationships, build those relationships up. Because when you do that over 150 people per business, suddenly when you have an entire neighborhood built of businesses this way, there's quite a lot of cross-pollination. There's a lot of that support going on. So in terms of getting community support and engagement, customer loyalty, the revenue sharing note makes a lot of sense for a small business that really relies on people coming in and really caring about the business in order to survive. But in terms of the repayments as well, because it's flexible, because it's tied to revenue, it makes it a lot easier to pay that back than a term loan in many cases. Obviously, not in every case, nothing's ever guaranteed, but at a time like this specifically, we're really seeing that come true. If we're about to start the second quarter, and probably we can assume for at least half of that quarter, a lot of businesses are going to have little or no revenue, which is going to be devastating. So imagine having to make a loan payment on top of that, because you took out a loan to start your business, because no one can start something from nothing. With a revenue sharing note, that business would only be paying back a set percentage of their revenue. So if they were killing it in Q1, they can probably make that payment. Q2, it's going to be a major dip. They probably weren't expecting it. Well, their repayments are going to reflect that as well. So it's really designed to work with the ebbs and flow of the small business, knowing that there's typically a lot less cash in the bank at any given time. So really it's designed to reflect that. It's designed to be a flexible way for a small business to still grow, to still, access capital, but repaid in a way that makes sense literally for the business and the books.
I mean, it makes sense. I wonder what that conversation looks like. Do you find? I mean, people understand equity, they understand debt. Those are kind of traditional things. I wonder if you and Mainvest sort of wrestle at all with trying to explain what it is to folks, or do they get it?
They do largely get it. It takes a conversation just because it's not as popular. But oftentimes with small businesses, there's a lot that they might not understand, or they understand every single part of it because they have more on their plate than understanding every single in and out of every single option. So really it's usually just one or two conversations. We have everything modeled out, and so we'll work really closely with businesses to say, is this going to be the best idea for you? What do your projections look like? Let's talk through it, so that by the end of the day, or the end of the conversation, it does become really clear. Because small businesses, we're every single day, this is they're so dependent on cash flow and revenue. It's really just dollars in and dollars out. And so, that's how the revenue sharing note works too. So it's typically something that small business owners understand and respond to pretty positively.
Yeah, I wonder, so I am curious about the sort of the profile of the businesses you work with, if there is such a thing. I mean, brick and mortar Main Street businesses seems to be the general idea, restaurants, commonly, retailers. Is there a sort of have you done a study on sort of what the average sort of length of being in business is among your businesses who reach out to you? I mean, they seem to be largely folks who've been around for a little while.
So I'd say at this point, it's probably a 60-40 of new concepts to existing concepts. Now, after all of this, that's probably going to change. It'll probably be flipped. So 60% existing businesses that have been around for, I'd say probably maybe anywhere from 1 to 3 years plus. There's a huge range in terms of existing businesses who come to us. There's a huge proportion of brand new businesses who are coming to us because as a brand new business, it's very hard to access traditional financing unless you have a ton of collateral. So that's where that bulk really comes in. But no, I don't know. There's such a wide range in terms of how long the businesses have been around. It's usually right away, like part of their growth strategy, or right after they open, as both marketing and bridge financing in many cases. Or again, they've been around for a really long time. They have community support and are using this as a way to tap into that community support. So it's kind of more of a horseshoe than anything else, I would say.
Yeah, that's great that your model is able to accommodate, both startups and businesses that have been around for a while. That's not always the case. And restaurants and retailers, largely among them.
Yeah, exactly. That's really the space that we're looking to occupy. It's a type of business that's really never going to access VC funding. So I know a lot of the other the portals kind of in the Reg CF space might also work with a brewery or a restaurant or a fitness studio, but it's usually the type of thing where it's equity based. It's going to be this massive concept. It's starting on Main Street, but going to be huge. And that's actually exactly what we usually don't work with. If a brewery eventually does become huge, that's awesome. But we are really working with those neighborhood businesses. It's one person in charge of a brewery, in charge of a yoga studio, these Main Street businesses that are really probably never going to be huge. They maybe will just generate an okay amount of revenue and everyone's happy at the end of the day, which, might seem small, but they offer such tremendous value to the community that we really see that as a kind of forgotten segment of the market. So it's really who we focus in on. It's, super, Main Street style, those brick and mortars. That's kind of our bread and butter. So a lot of that becomes restaurants kind of other food service organizations, just because those are traditionally very hard to lend to. So we become, again, a very attractive option, but also anything else that's really community oriented.
Yeah. You said they're your bread and butter. Well, it turns out they're the bread and butter of the American economy too. So,
yeah.
it's great. I am curious too about more thoughts you have specifically about crowdfunding, sort of maybe even above and beyond the financials. You talked about a fan base, something along those lines of the relationships that develop between businesses and community members, and it seems like crowdfunding can play a role there, and as a tool to generate excitement and community. I'm curious what kind of what your thoughts are on that, on strategies for doing that, and how you talk to businesses about doing that, about taking advantage of those opportunities.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's where we actually don't even think of ourselves really as a crowdfunding platform. We're Reg CF, so we are literally crowdfunding, but we really do think about it more as community investment, because it's not the idea that people are, offering a handout or a donation or something like that, or getting a t-shirt in return. We really want community members to have agency, feel empowered to think about themselves as investors, as having a stake in their community, at least a financial stake. And so that's really powerful because it unlocks a lot for communities. It does, it becomes a little bit more difficult because a lot of people don't realize that they have that power within them, that, $100 that they were going to spend on, a meal or something like that can actually become an investment that grows and diversifies their portfolio. That's not something that's been talked about a lot because it's such a new concept, but I think it's extremely powerful for people across the community, people from all backgrounds and all wealth levels, being able to say, I am an investor, I'm choosing who, gets my support in this community. I'm saying I want this type of business to be here, and I'm, getting a financial return for it if that business succeeds. I think that's incredibly powerful just from a community standpoint. The idea that, I think in this day and age, a lot of people feel like, oh, I'm the little guy or the little gal. I don't have any power. I don't mean anything in this world, which it sounds cynical, but I do think there's kind of that sense of cynicism, and, being able to say you can invest in your community, you can invest in a local business. I think that's incredibly powerful just for the morale, and kind of the ethos of a community. And then again, when you're investing in a local place, that's good for the economy. All of the money is staying local. It's going to the business, it's generating revenue, it's paying workers, and then ideally it's going back to you in the form of returns. And as well as, emotionally, just the idea that people are taking hold and, rallying behind their local community. It makes it more resilient at a time like this when we all feel like suddenly we all want to come together. Everything's been so incredibly divided that if we can kind of walk away from, the icky things of politics and, the fact that people are living paycheck to paycheck and all of these horrible things that we know are happening in the world, we can actually all come together and say, well, you know what, there's this one brewery that everyone loves and we want it to succeed. I just think there's something emotionally really compelling about that. So I think that, community investment and crowdfunding as a way to bring people together, across, like I said, across wealth levels, across, where they are in society, where they came from, I think that that's incredibly powerful. Both obviously from an economic standpoint, but also, from a morale standpoint too.
I see a question here in the chat I wanted to put to you. It's asking about how Mainvest fits into the local business ecosystem with other economic development partners and funders like banks, small business development centers, SCORE, and other local players.
Yeah, we have a lot of friends in the space too, just kind of at a hyper local level. As something that we're going to be expanding out over time as we're in new places and things like that. We try and fit ourselves in as a partner to everybody. When it comes to banks and traditional lenders, we have a lot of relationships because oftentimes a bank wants to underwrite a big enough loan, but they simply can't. And so they'll refer someone to us either to get the rest of their financing or say, hey, get started with Mainvest, raise your first, $20,000, $50,000 with them. Once you have something in the bank, when you have something solid, you'll be able to come back to us and we're going to be able to lend to you a lot more easily and with a lot more money. That's actually exactly what happened in the case of my mom's bakery. She got started on Mainvest, and then based on how much she was raising from the Richmond community, she went back to her bank and got much more favorable terms on the rest of her financing. So either as a kind of a precursor, getting referrals from those who are just not ready for traditional lending, or as, something like bridge financing, or just kind of, an extra, piece of the pie. That's where we usually fit in, because at the end of the day, a lot of these traditional lenders, the SBA, they want small businesses to succeed. And so if this is going to be a way for them to be able to get to the next level and unlock the rest of that capital, that's really where we fit in. Same thing with like the SBCD, SCORE, Runway Project, all of these other organizations that offer small business support, technical support, those different relationships. We always like to maintain good relationships, just because we want to be one of many options. We don't think we're going to be the right fit for absolutely everybody, but if we would never want someone to say, gosh, I can't start my business because of X, Y, and Z, when we could have been an option to them. So we're always doing workshops, going to events, things like that, just to make sure that we have those good relationships, so that if the right business comes along, we have those referral partners in place, and we're able to say, vice versa as well. If a business comes to us and it seems like they do need some additional support, we know exactly where to send them, to go to SCORE, to go to these other different types of, business boot camps and things like that, to make sure that they're fully equipped for success. Because like I said, everyone wants these small businesses to succeed. So we need to work together and make sure they all have the right resources.
Yeah, great. So you mentioned Richmond, Virginia. I know that Mainvest really got its start in Massachusetts, and it seems like a lot of the offerings are there, but I see that there are offerings in New York, New Jersey, New Hampshire, Virginia, I gather, Kentucky, I think, right? Or
yeah, we just started in Tennessee, yep.
So you're expanding quite a bit. I'm curious what the vision is. Does Mainvest hoping to be in every community around the country, or that seems like a lot. And I should say too that you've got quite a large team put together. So it's great that you're able to do all that you're able to do with outreach and education and things. So I'm curious what the vision is, the big vision is.
Yeah, I mean, we would really like to be everywhere. The reason we're starting the way we are, and I think we've grown outside of where we even expected to, is because we want to make sure we have those community ties. Since it's a marketplace, we want to make sure we don't just have the businesses, but we have the community on board as well. Because it can be really hard for a business to go out to a community that's never heard of Mainvest, let alone community capital, and say, hey, invest in me, because it's unfamiliar. And so, we started out in Massachusetts. The majority of the team is actually from the North Shore. So it started out really hyper local, basically just in the North Shore, in Salem and Lynn and these communities, literally on the ground, working with, the Main Streets organizations, things like that, to make sure that community members kind of knew who we were, and we could support those businesses in a really on the ground type of way. And so our growth has been, pretty targeted because of that. So we were out in, down in New York, just because there's a ton of businesses down there, and we have a small tech team down there. Out in Tennessee, another member of Uber who, kind of had Nick's similar job in terms of launching the marketplace out in Nashville, kind of had a similar, a similar path that a lot of us did, and said, hey, I really like what Mainvest is doing. Can I come launch Nashville? And so that worked out really well. So now we're kind of expanding out into the Southeast more generally. And so it's really been where we can be really strategic, focusing in on the community, having a good understanding of the community. But then businesses will hear about us either because they maybe they saw an ad, or their friend posted about it, or they read an article, and it just is inspiring to them, and they say, hey, I promise I can go, engage my community. I have all of these ties. And so, we say, sure, we don't know anything about this area, but you do. So here are the tools to go out and succeed. And so we've accidentally ended up in all these different places. My mom's was the first in Richmond, just because, we knew who she was. But then since then, again, the community really took to community capital. And so a ton of other businesses in Richmond wanted to get in touch. So it's kind of grown organically, because it can be one community member who, again, maybe it's their friend's business who was raising on Mainvest and they thought it was really cool, or, a Facebook group for, a specific industry posts about their someone's community capital raise, and because it's so inspiring, people around the country at this point have kind of raised their hands to say, this sounds like a good fit for my business, and I want to engage my community. And so it's been really cool to see how it's grown, and so we expect that to continue to happen, and we'll be more intentional in terms of launching in these different regions over the next couple of months.
So I do want to spend some time since talking about what's the current economic situation in communities where you're working, and obviously everything you've said so far makes it clear that Mainvest could play a really important role in helping businesses address the economic challenges they're seeing, the cash flow challenges that folks are going to see in Main Street businesses are, hard to wrap our heads around, really. I mean, they're going to have some pretty major impacts, and I'm curious to hear what Mainvest is doing. I know you've launched a couple of programs, and I'm curious to hear how those are going, what those look like, and how they're going.
Yeah, for sure. So the first one that we launched is the Main Street Initiative. So pretty straightforward. It's a $2,000 zero interest short-term loan upon launching a community capital raise. So we did that to basically provide short-term and long-term recovery. So short-term, $2,000, so that really, business owners can pay rent if their landlords haven't forgiven their rents, that they can make payroll, really just get through the next couple of weeks, so that at the same time, they're also raising community capital for longer term initiatives, going out to their communities, kind of doing the traditional crowdfunding type of thing, whether that's social media or networking or just making pitches to people in their community to raise usually, $10,000+. Our average is usually around 60, but we have no idea what the average is going to look like because it's only been a couple weeks since we launched this program. But yeah, short term, the $2,000 loan, long term, a greater sum of money that's both going to act as their cash flow to get them through the next couple of weeks, as well as provide some recovery and growth longer term. So that's the Main Street Initiative. That's another area where we're really working with people around the country. We're providing the tools to be able to go out and engage communities, so that if we can't be there on the ground, like I said, if we don't have an understanding of the community, we're making sure that all of those businesses are fully equipped to go out and basically spread the word about community capital and raise the capital that they need, tap into that community support in a really tangible way. The second initiative that we have is called Still Open. So really, we just realized that there were a couple different jumbled tools to show you who's still open for business, because it's just been insane with the mandated closures and the stay-at-home advisories. But really, it's completely unprecedented. No one really knows what's going on. So we wanted to build a hub for community support. So whether that's ordering takeout and delivery, and that's really kind of the primary thing that we have, or if it's gift card sales or some other creative solution to support a business throughout COVID-19, or if they're taking donations for a worker relief fund or accepting investment through Mainvest, all of those different options that businesses are pursuing to utilize community support to stay afloat. We created one centralized hub to show what all of those are, and on a map who nearby you is seeking your support. So it's pretty focused here in Boston. We've got some great partners in the region building that out. But again, if a business wants to go on and out in Texas and create a page and share that, we're going to be completely open. It's very, very easy to use. So we're leaving the entire map of the country open for people to go in, say that they're still open, and engage their community for support. So we've also seen a really great response there, especially from community members who, again, aren't familiar with the space, have never heard of community capital, but do want to support local. We think it's a really great way to engage them and say, it is great that you want to support local. Here are a ton of different ways. And in addition, this is the world of community capital. If you're interested, you can become an investor too. So that's what we're doing on the ground, really just looking to support as many businesses as possible because this is such an insane time. But yeah, we're pretty excited about that. In addition to the fact that just the core mission of Mainvest and utilizing community capital and the revenue sharing note, we think it's no better time to, to try and make that part of your capital strategy if it makes sense for your business. So we're finding that just the kind of the core product is holding true as well.
Yeah. And so those Main Street Initiative note or that Main Street Initiative is providing capital, providing loans, right, to businesses, to small business owners. Is that specifically for businesses that are already in your portfolio, or is that open to everybody?
That's open to everybody. So it's just contingent upon community capital raise. So there are going to be conditions. If a business is not going to be able to do a community capital raise, or if they don't want to, if they're not really the best fit, then they probably won't qualify for the loan. But it is designed for those businesses that are looking to go out and raise to provide some short-term relief for them. So it's really open to anybody as long as it's still going to be a fit for a Mainvest raise to begin with.
There are a couple of questions I want to acknowledge, and we'll come to those in a minute. But while we're on this topic, I wanted to ask a few more questions about kind of the current situation that we're in. So one of them is about channels and engaging folks. I mean, it's both a time when the internet is virtually the only channel to communicate with folks, and so it's a great opportunity, it seems like, to be in position to do that with clients. It's also a challenge, I got to believe, in to be communicating in some senses on the community level. A lot of times people will go into a store, a restaurant, and they can learn about what's happening by being there from personal interaction, and then online platforms can support those communications, and yet so I'm curious what you're seeing now in terms of the communication channels and how folks are finding their way to you. I'm thinking about how businesses are connecting with investors, and how they're communicating the need, and are investors showing up?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's definitely going to be a challenge. And so luckily, it seems like there are a lot of, especially free resources out there for businesses that don't really have a great online presence to build one really quickly. And so as we find those resources, we're going to keep sharing them out because it's more important than ever. And I think a lot of businesses that might have been riding on those in-person experiences and not necessarily building out an Instagram presence or building out their website, they were unprepared for this being the only way that they could interact with their customers. So luckily, I've seen a lot of that just around. And I'm really happy that people are stepping up to the plate to help with that. The businesses that we're seeing that are utilizing a specific type of messaging, making their pitch really honestly and being authentic, we are seeing the investors come out for them, utilizing their own community, utilizing those channels. But it really does come down to having a specific message that you can broadcast in an effective way. So is it that your friends and family are all over social media and willing to share your message? Is it that you're building out a website, or is it that you're doing some sort of direct mail campaign? We're actually still seeing all of this unfold, but so far the results are pretty promising utilizing those online channels, because also people are all online because there's nowhere else for them to be. So even though there's a lot of noise out there, my hypothesis is that there's also a lot more space for these online messages to come through. So yeah, it's a challenge, and I actually don't even have a complete answer just because it's all happening so quickly. But we're trying to provide all the tools and messaging and templates that we can so that a business can go out and feel confident raising money.
Yeah, well, it's great you're providing all that support because, yeah, like you said, I mean, there are a lot of wonderful Main Street businesses that are very, very good at building community, but maybe not super savvy about how to do that through internet channels. And so transferring the skills they've developed, maybe in some cases over decades, to this suddenly new channel for many folks is important. Thank you for doing that. So maybe we could turn to some of these questions here. One is about the terms basically for businesses and the return for investors. We talked about it's the revenue sharing note that you focus on, but and I like how it's displayed on the website in pretty simple terms in terms of a multiple, and but maybe if you could walk us through a little bit more kind of the the details of what that looks like.
Sure. So revenue terms for businesses. So it really depends on the business. Each business sets their own terms. So we'll take a look at their projections, their industry, and basically come up with a number and a term that works for them. So in terms of the investor return, basically it's really, again, it's up to the business and basically what the market can bear. So if they can raise at super low terms and get investors to invest in them at 1.1x, then that's awesome. Makes the capital much less expensive, and will allow them to, kind of go out with that. But from an investor standpoint, unless you're super tied to the business, especially if you're a stranger to the business, you're probably going to be looking for a little bit more of a competitive return. So we like to think psychologically, even do early bird returns if it makes sense to incentivize investing at the beginning of a campaign versus at the end of a campaign. So it really comes down to the business, their industry, and again, what they think the market will bear to be able to set a return. So it's usually on average about a 1.5x return to investors. But again, we've gone higher for businesses that really want to reward those early supporters, allow them to essentially double their money. Sure, the capital is a little bit more expensive. It's over a period, usually of 4 to 6 years, sometimes a little bit more. Sometimes we can be done in 3 years in terms of repayments. Again, completely up to the business. They get to set those terms and what percentage of revenue they're sharing out in order to get there. But yeah, it depends on psychologically what we think investors will respond to, and what the business is comfortable with long term. So it's kind of a non-answer because businesses get to set all of their own terms every single time.
Yeah. Great. And I guess, the part of the notion of a revenue sharing note is that it all depends on what revenue looks like, right? At the end of the day. So if revenue is great, then the returns are great. I guess you've only been around, you've only been operating for about 3 years, right?
Yeah,
or
like a year and a half,
or even less. Yeah. So have you had businesses satisfy the loans yet? Is that something that's still yet to come?
Still yet to come, but at this time, 95% are on track or ahead of their projections, which is really promising, we think.
Cool. Yeah. So another question here about your revenue model, and about limits, maybe minimum amounts that businesses need to raise to be on your platform.
Sure. So our revenue model is pretty straightforward. We take a one-time 6% fee only off of a successful raise. So if a business comes on, they want to raise $100,000, they don't raise $100,000, we don't take anything. But businesses set a target and a maximum that they can raise. So the minimum to basically get onto the platform, we usually say is around 10,000, just because less than that, it doesn't necessarily make sense just from an economics perspective of putting them onto the platform because of everything that goes into it. But usually too, in terms of taking community investment, people are typically able to raise more than that anyway. But again, every situation is completely different. And I should also say that obviously past performance and past results don't predict future ones as well. But yeah, usually around 10,000, and we take 6% off of a successful raise. Our average right now is around a $50,000 or $60,000 raise. But again, that changes, pretty frequently, especially in these uncertain times.
Yeah. Yeah. I am curious your thoughts about one of the big question marks right now is liquidity, investor liquidity, and availability of capital, even in before the coronavirus pandemic and the related economic problems. Capital was tight, especially in a lot of communities around the country where community capital is especially needed. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on what we might be looking at in terms of the availability of capital. And even if investor interest is really great, are we going to see the robust investment that we need to see moving forward? Is the capital going to be there? It's on people's minds anyway. I'm curious your thoughts.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. It's something we've thought a lot about. And I think that's really where community support has to play a role, because if there's less money to go around, then more people are going to have to step up and contribute. I think that there's a lot of people who are fortunate to still have their jobs, but probably be working from home and saving money in other ways, that we're hoping that we and others in the space can inspire them to step up and consider diversifying their portfolios and investing some of that cash that's become available into these businesses that need it most, and into the communities that need it most. And that those who might have a little bit less to go around are able to rally more people, so that at the end of the day, if a business needs $10,000, whether it's coming from one person, 100 people, or 1,000 people, they're able to get there. So again, it's a kind of a non-answer, because we actually don't know what's going to happen. So far, we are seeing a lot of that grassroots support. So, we always have investors that, luckily still do see this as a viable alternative to traditional forms of investing, and will invest large sums of money either into a business that they just emotionally care about, or that they just believe in from a financial sense. Right now, we're seeing a lot more in terms of grassroots people, doing those $1, $3, $500 investments. But since we're seeing more of them, we're still seeing the needle move a little bit for these businesses. So again, every investor is going to be different. Their situation is going to be different. We're certainly not going to ask someone who just got laid off to consider investing in a local business, because there's more important things than investing when you are looking to make ends meet. But we are hoping that people who are able to step up to the plate and consider it as a viable alternative, because we just simply don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah. You mentioned small dollar amounts. There's a question about minimum investment amounts for investors. I think it's $100, right? Is that it? Mainvest?
Yep. So we've had some businesses even raise at 50. We really see a lot more success at higher dollar amounts, but a business can also set whatever minimum they want. So if they're utilizing Mainvest as like kind of a private placement, but to include non-accredited investors, and they wanted to set a much higher minimum, something at like 5 or 10,000, they certainly could. Usually it's 100 or 1,000. Either way, much lower than when you have to get in at $100,000 to invest in something.
Yeah. Do you ever talk about or employ strategies to sort of aggregate capital among investors so that, I don't know, to keep the cap table cleaner, or just to simplify the process? If I just picture, 1,000 investors at $100 a piece on the cap table, that could be, 1,000 people, or it could be sort of one sort of investment group or fund or something along those lines. Do you ever talk about that sort of situation, or how to handle that?
It shows up as kind of like one entity. So everyone invests through Mainvest. Then there's one lump sum that goes to the business, and then it's paid out automatically through the platform. So like all of the calculations and all of that is taken care of. So it just looks like Mainvest on the cap table instead of like 1,000 different people. Otherwise it would get messy, and that would not be something that a small business owner would want to take care of.
Yeah, I guess one of the beauties of a platform raise, one of the things that technology has made available to us. That's fantastic. So I wonder, maybe if we have not too much time left, but a little bit of time left. If you could just share some thoughts with us about the future, what the future looks like for crowdfunding, and what you'd kind of love to see happen when you sort of daydream about where crowdfunding is headed, and maybe where Mainvest is headed.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, my hope, honestly, my immediate hope is that small businesses weather the storm, and that in terms of public health, all of this is cleared up really safely and quickly, so that these businesses can get back to normal, because we really don't want to see a ton of businesses go under because of this. But longer term, my hope is really just that people start stepping up to the plate and seeing crowdfunding and community investment as a viable alternative. My dream is that people see it as a necessary part of their investment strategy. I've got my 401k, maybe I have my Robinhood downloaded because I want to be an investor. And of course, I'm investing in my local businesses too. That's the type of sentiment I want people to have, because I think people already have that sentiment when it comes to, oh, I'm going to go out to eat somewhere. Am I going to choose a chain restaurant or something local? My dream is that people find within themselves the, kind of the, and feel empowered to think about that, in financial terms as well. Because like I said before, I think that there's a lot of agency in feeling like you can invest in the businesses around you. So, that's really my hope. And, again, I'll say that, investors should, take those decisions really seriously and, do all of the research we can. And Mainvest can never recommend investing in specific offerings or things like that. But really my hope is just that people see crowdfunding as something that they're able to take part in. I think oftentimes when people hear about a business, raising money through crowdfunding or, coming to town or something like that, they don't necessarily feel like a part of it. I think there's this sense that businesses kind of just pop up, and a lot of people don't know what has to go into it and just how hard it is. And that's okay. We don't expect people to know that if they're not small business owners. But I would love for people to feel like they're a part of the process. And I think crowdfunding and community investment is a great way to get people involved. So that's really my hope for the future, as well as Drew on the financial side too. We've made different recommendations, as you see, that are all available online in terms of making it easier for small business owners to access these regulations and access this type of capital as well. So really my hope is just that it becomes more accessible for everybody on both sides of the market.
Yeah, great. Yeah, you mentioned your parents' entrepreneurial background, and we talked about the possibility of a truly an active entrepreneurial sort of movement ahead out of this these changes, the economic changes that are no doubt ahead of us, and yeah, thinking about really a sudden and sort of complete recognition among folks, among potential investors, that to make that part of the that it's essential to fuel that movement. Investor dollars are essential, and that the more of them that come from the community, the better for everybody, really. So it's great that you're ready, there and ready to support that entrepreneurial movement that's ahead. Yeah, I think I got wind of some activity at the White House recently. Apparently, some restaurant industry executives were invited to weigh in on where stimulus money maybe should go, and what the stimulus package should do in terms of bailing out the restaurant industry. And I saw the list of folks who were there, and there was a representative from McDonald's and some other major chains. Didn't seem to be anybody on the list that I saw who was representing independent restaurants in communities around the country. I hate to think that stimulus dollars could wind up in kind of supporting the wrong kind of development in our communities, as local businesses struggle with cash flow problems. The worst outcome of this could be that really the large industrial and corporate entities just gain more competitive advantage. Obviously they don't need it. They don't need more competitive advantage in our communities. And obviously love to see communities everywhere thrive coming out of this, and reimagining how we can build our economies. And so other questions folks maybe have out there that we haven't addressed? I see one about following up with Isabel. I will, when I send out the recording, I will share Isabel's contact information or email address, if that's okay. So I think folks will be able to contact her that way. There's a question about place-based impact investment dollars from foundations and corporations. I'm not, Do you work at all with like community foundations or corporate foundations in the communities?
So at this time, it's really based on individual contributors, just because it's, that's kind of the way that the back end is set up. I think it's something longer term that we do want to think about, in terms of kind of, just because it's sorry, it's like a complicated thing because we have thought about it. The problem is that, the way that our basically our Reg CF is set up and the way that our back end works is it's a single contribution from one bank account into one business. And so usually my sense is usually that people would want to diversify across a number over a set period of time. And the way we operate is not as a fund where you can kind of put in money and allow us to disperse it. It really is a one-to-one. So I don't know if that's helpful, because if we have seen, individual investors through, an LLC, kind of businesses investing in other businesses, which is really cool. But again, it's more of a one-to-one transfer rather than a fund. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, I mean, I think I gather the question is about in this space that you're working in, which is community development in some ways, kind of broadly, and in particular ways, but broadly about community development, helping to support the growth of healthy communities. There are, of course, other organizations that are that share that vision, community foundations, and corporations in communities. Where maybe a lot of the people work for that corporation, or generally they just have a long history of concern about that community. I wonder what the role could be moving forward. I get, we're so early in as some folks like to say, crowdfunding's been around forever, but this kind of version of crowdfunding through a Reg CF platform. I should say crowd investing. I need to learn to say that better. Is relatively new, and I guess what those partnerships could look like moving forward of all the various stakeholder groups that are aligned will be interesting to see. And I gather you'd be sort of open to exploring possibilities of whether it be sort of side by side, working in parallel for similar goals, and it's interesting. There's so many possibilities ahead. So if there aren't any other questions, we're pretty much out of time here. I do want to thank Isabel for joining us today and sharing her thoughts. And for folks who are joining us today or will be listening and watching a recording in the future, thank you for taking the time to learn about what Mainvest is doing and what crowdfunding is doing to support community economies and entrepreneurs, and enabling investors to get more engaged in their communities. You can always find us at www.comcapcoalition.org to learn more about what's happening with the coalition. We're really excited about all the excitement that's happening nationally about various strategies and all the innovations that are happening to implement community capital strategies. And we hope you'll all kind of lean into to our vision of coordinating those efforts nationally and making community capital and crowdfunding central to the way our economy works. It's democracy in action, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you all. Be well, stay safe, be nice to each other in this crazy time. All right. And thanks again, Isabel.
Thanks so much for having me.
It was our pleasure.